Hello there, I'm Rahetalius. If you're new here, I run a series called Concepts Checkup, which has always been about me looking over a certain community-made concept, talking about it, and giving my opinions on it. It's a surprisingly fun thing to do, given how often the community manages to create something that either gets put in the game directly, such as the latest Warframe Zaku, or something that inspires currently existing content, such as the Typhus Warframe concept being the influence behind the creation of Nidus. Aside that, I've never definitively made or assisted in creating a Warframe concept, since I have the artistic ability of a monkey with Alzheimer's disease. That was the case until recently, when I was asked to assist in designing the kit of a Warframe concept, which brings me to this video today. Rather than making just another concept checkup, I've decided to showcase this Warframe concept in its entirety, while giving my reasoning and thoughts behind the actual kit of the Warframe. This is not a regular concept checkup because, unlike the others, I'm not discussing the ability design of somebody else, but rather my own. That being said, feel free to roast or toast me in the comments, as it's not every day that I get asked to help make a Warframe. I hope you enjoy this concept as much as I do. So, without further ado, let's begin.
Welcome to this Warframe concept overview featuring Acrea, the treasure hunter Warframe. Acrea was conceptualized by Veletamoth, final artwork was completed by Cleo Naturin, and ability framework was done by Rahetalius. Note: Warframe statistics are not finalized, and so the current figures are intended to serve as placeholders, as this is simply a concept. Acrea is an agile Warframe with a risky playstyle, thriving most when closer to enemies, while simultaneously putting herself in potential harm's way. Acrea possesses a health capacity of 450, a shield capacity of 375, an armor value of 175, an energy capacity of 270, and a sprint speed of 1.2. Passive: Treasure Hunter. Being no stranger to the thrill of ransacking complexes and ruins for valuables, Acrea possesses 100% chance of unlocking locked lockers and a 20-meter loot radar.
First and foremost, Acrea is intended to be a high-risk, high-reward Warframe, which theoretically has survivability, but in practice depends entirely on what the player does, since her stats are not exactly exceptional besides her sprint speed and energy capacity. In a nutshell, Acrea is a caster Warframe, sort of like Nyx or Ember. But what defines Acrea is that she does not have any direct survivability in her kit, besides her first and fourth ability, both of which are not invisibility or damage reduction, but rather evasion. Evasion is a mechanic that is already utilised a bit, both by mods that can give it and by Titania, who gets a passive 50% evasion while in her Razorwing form. Titania can actually benefit from these mods while in Razorwing form, meaning that theoretically she can get over 70% damage reduction in addition to already having evasion just by pressing 4. However, evasion is not a true survivability mechanic, since evasion only affects the chances of an enemy hitting you, not how much damage you actually take. If you've played Payday 2 before, you can think of evasion in Warframe as using a dodge build in Payday 2. If you haven't played Payday 2 before, then you can think of evasion like this. Rhino's Iron Skin is the equivalent of putting on a bulletproof vest. It can take multiple shots, but eventually it will be worn down. Alternatively, evasion is the equivalent of flipping a coin. If it lands on heads, you take no damage. If it lands on tails, you get shot. That sort of gives evasion a little layer of RNG, because unlike damage reduction, evasion does not guarantee you better chances of surviving damage. Because of that, Acrea has evasion as her primary method of not being blown up. I'm aware that only having evasion as a defining mechanic is a poor idea for a Warframe, which is why Acrea is also a supportive Warframe, in terms of increasing the amount of loot required and the damage potential of her team, both of which are factors which can be valued greatly.
Ability number 1, Reprisal. Energy cost 10. Acrea quickly dashes forward, evading all incoming damage, and procs for 1 second and gaining 35% evasion for 4 seconds. After the duration, Acrea sends forth a wave of punishing energy from her crook in a frontal cone, dealing 600 damage. Damage dealt is increased based on damage taken, and crit chance or crit damage is increased based on damage avoided. Repeated usage of Reprisal increases energy cost by 15, capped at 80, and grants a stack of Trick up to 4 stacks.
Going back to what I said earlier, in order to counteract how unreliable evasion can be for a Warframe, Acrea's first ability can be used repeatedly, albeit with an increased energy cost for each successive activation. The first second of Reprisal's duration is an extremely brief period of complete damage and proc immunity, meaning that with good timing or a good amount of luck, a player can avoid potentially lethal damage by just pressing a button. Obviously, Reprisal is an ability that heavily depends on player positioning, because after the 4-second evasion duration is over, Acrea attacks the area in front of her in a frontal cone shape, with the damage scaling based on how much damage she took and how much damage she avoided. Although the amount of evasion from Reprisal can technically be increased with power strength, it would affect the potential damage from Reprisal as a cost, which is why Reprisal is made with 2 sides in mind. You can either build for high evasion to maximise your survivability and your critical chance and damage for Reprisal at the cost of lowering base damage itself, or you can build for low evasion to maximise base damage at the cost of lowering critical chance and damage as well as survivability. This ability is sort of made to be changed based on a player's preferences. If you like just dealing damage, then lowering the evasion might be your choice. Alternatively, if you like relying on the semi-RNG of evasion, then increasing the evasion might be your choice. I have given some other thoughts to Reprisal, such as allowing the damage to scale with melee mods, except for Rivens, or giving guaranteed additional loot drops from killed enemies, but I felt like that would have allowed Reprisal to be overloaded for just a first ability. This is simply just a concept, so I'd be interested to know what you think.
Ability number 2, Serendipity. Stat cost 2 or more. Acrea grants temporary buffs to all allies within 25 meters based on number of trick stacks spent. 2 stacks gain 50% multi-shot for 15 seconds. 3 stacks gain 60% multi-shot and 50% ammo efficiency for 15 seconds. 4 stacks gain 70% multi-shot, 60% ammo efficiency, and 50% chance for all critical hits and status procs to apply twice for 15 seconds.
This is where Acrea's supportive features come in. Although the Helminth system offers the ability to give ammo efficiency via energized munitions, this is not a team-wide buff. That being said, by design, Acrea would be the first Warframe to give her team ammo efficiency in addition to theoretically being able to increase her team's damage output by a factor of 50%. Serendipity is intended to be Acrea's method of contributing to her team, but only if she gains stacks of Trick through repeatedly using her Reprisal ability. Just like Nidus's parasitic link, Serendipity has no energy cost, instead only costing all the stacks that Acrea has built up, assuming she has at least 2. This was done because repeatedly using Reprisal to build up stacks obviously has a high energy cost to it, so demanding more energy on top of that just to use Serendipity would be kind of stupid. In order to fully emphasize how powerful Serendipity can be, building for power duration does not affect Serendipity, but power strength still does. In other words, no matter how you build Acrea, Serendipity will always last only 15 seconds with each cast. However, building for power strength would mean that theoretically, Acrea and her team would gain over 100% multi-shot, ammo efficiency, and basically double crits and status procs for only 15 seconds. High multi-shot would affect a weapon's damage, critical hits and status procs would apply twice per hit, and ammo efficiency would be ludicrous. Yes, I'm aware that would be absolutely insane. That's the point of Serendipity. it's supposed to be a limited period of do as much damage as possible, because Acrea's Serendipity takes time and stacks to build up. However, I'm also aware that high ammo efficiency would be questionable, as having ammo efficiency over 100% would either consume no ammunition at all or potentially give ammo back when firing a weapon. With this in mind, even I'm not sure if the ammo efficiency buff should have a cap similar to how Trinity's damage reduction buff from Blessing has a cap. Again, this is just a concept, so I'd be interested to know what you think.
Ability number 3, Viper's Kiss. Energy cost 50. Strike targeted enemy with your flail, applying slash and toxin, then kick them away, detonating upon hitting a surface or other enemy, creating a cloud of noxious fumes that lasts for 20 seconds that staggers and applies toxin damage to all enemies within a 12-meter radius. Viper's Kiss Augment, Viper's Lash. Viper's Kiss now instead deals 50% viral and 50% slash damage in a frontal cone, affected by melee mods.
Similar to Reprisal, Viper's Kiss is an ability designed to be changed based on a player's preferences. Viper's Kiss by default is intended to be used for crowd control, not for damage. Although Slash and Toxin are some of the best damage procs in the game, the point of Viper's Kiss is to turn an enemy into living crowd control, since kicking them would create a cloud of gas which would simultaneously stagger and apply toxin damage to enemies that enter. This is similar to Protea's Grenade Fan ability, with the main difference being that Viper's Kiss has a significantly bigger range. To counterbalance this, Viper's Kiss would not have a high base damage to begin with, likely something in the range of 100. Again, this is to reinforce the notion that Viper's Kiss is intended for crowd control, not damage. Alternatively, the Viper's Lash augment exists for those players that do want Viper's Kiss to be used for damage. In a nutshell, using the augment would convert the ability from a target kick ability to a simple frontal cone ability, just like Reprisal's damage effect. However, the damage itself would be converted from slash and toxin to slash and viral, which would be split up equally 50-50 based on Acrea's power strength, and would scale with melee mods with the exception of Riven's. Viper's Kiss basically presents the player with a choice. Either don't take the augment and just use the ability for crowd control, or take the augment and use the ability for damage. Ultimately, Acrea's entire theme is to be a high-risk, high-reward Warframe, and that can have a different interpretation based on a player's preferences.
Ability number 4, Daredevil. Stat cost 4. Gain 25% evasion, and all incoming damage is spread out and taken over a 9-second duration rather than being taken up front. Note: Reprisal's evasion bonus and evasion mods such as Agility Drift and Aviator can stack with Daredevil. Gain an additional plus 1% evasion and 1% chance of additional loot drop from enemies for every second that Daredevil is active, up to a cap of 50% evasion and 100% loot drop chance. Deactivating Daredevil causes evasion and loot drop chance bonuses to decay by 2% per second, and Daredevil cannot be reactivated until both values reach 0.
This is intended to be Acrea's most defining feature. Unlike regular abilities, Daredevil is not a channeled ability, meaning that activating Daredevil does not consume energy over time, nor does it have a set duration. Instead, Daredevil stays on until it's either removed by a nullifier or until deactivated for whatever reason. However, in order to prevent rapid use of Daredevil, Daredevil cannot be reactivated until its buff values have completely decreased down to 0%. I'm aware that, on paper, Daredevil sounds absurd. 50% evasion and 100% more loot from enemies sounds kind of stupid, and I would honestly agree with you there. However, you should not forget the self-debuff part of Daredevil. While Daredevil is active, all incoming damage is taken as a 9-second damage over time. So, for example, instead of taking a 500 damage hit immediately, you would take that same 500 damage over a 9-second duration. On low levels, that would be an issue, yes. However, the higher enemy levels get, the more of a gamble this would be. Since you as a player don't have an accurate way of measuring how much damage you're taking at any given moment, Putting on a 50% evasion buff, as well as taking all hits as a damage over time, basically means that you're almost constantly taking damage over time instead of being a one and done hit. Unless you have a constant or guaranteed source of healing, this would mean that you as the player would have to half rely, half pray, and the active evasion buff would save you from incoming damage, even if it's taken as damage over time. And that's the point. Acrea is intended to be a high-risk, high-reward Warframe. She offers evasion and innate multi-shot, ammo efficiency and loot drop buffs at the cost of exactly that. All you have to rely on to live is evasion. This concludes the Acrea Warframe concept overview. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed making it. Credits go to Valedemoth for being the original concept maker, and Cleo Naturin for being the final concept artist. My name is Rahetalius, and as always, thank you for watching.